why must you always be an activist? Why must you always engage at, you know, that place on the scale where, you know, work is local, where there's something that happens between a small group of people, where, you know, it's often scorned by the mainstream media, where, I mean, what happens that's imperative for you at that point on the scale that's different from something that's imperative to you about, say, talking on the Today Show? What is necessary about that work for you?
I mean, I guess this is the I don't see that as a scale. I mean, I think that neither is they are both more effective the more that they go together. I don't see it as, you know, one is. It just depends on your definition of activism. I mean, I will be only as effective as I am connected to wider movements. I will only be as effective as I am reflecting the needs of wider movements. I mean, if I'm just a talking head, sort of disembodied, that there's no way, for example, that I could connect people to activist movements to do something with what I say if I'm not connected to activist movements. I mean, so, and I would never be a disembodied talking head. So I think that's, you know, I mean, the whole point is to reflect, you know, the needs of social movements, and to be connected to larger movements, or there's no point in talking,
okay,
I guess.
But if you don't see it as a scale, what's the metaphor that works for you?
That there's different modes of change, and there is a scale within each one about being, you know, potentially more
visible,
effective, but it's not a separation of that all the different modes of activism go together, and so you can be I don't know how to describe it.
Well, like it sounds to me like you're talking about a network as opposed to a line. You know, scale makes it sound like a line.
Yeah.
And a network is like, well, you can't actually have one without the other. You have they don't work unless there's 5 things and they're all associated and all the 5 parts are working and they all have equal value. And within each of those, there's a scale, is what you're saying.
Yeah.
Yeah. You know, what I believe, especially if you think about young people, but, you know, myself included, is that something has changed in our perception of the meaning of work that falls out of the radar of, you know, celebrity. That's where we started, so we can perhaps end here. But the meaning of that has changed really for people, so that in the history of the world, people really mostly, you know, did things in their local setting and thought that that mattered. And that if you look at young people, part of what they all think that Bush is an asshole. They're not doing anything because they somehow have been convinced the only way that what they could do that matters is if they're on the Today Show. Mm-hmm. And no young person can be on the Today Show, so then they're like, okay, well, I'm not going to do anything. Mm-hmm. And so you have a generation of people, myself sort of fighting against this, right, who believes that unless you can, you know, do position A, which is, you know, mainstream celebrity, nothing else matters. And, you know, you want to say, well, mainstream celebrity is connected to grassroots activism, is connected to policy, is connected to organizing, is connected to, you know, probably several other things, right?
Right.
They don't know anymore that those things are real, and that that's an effect that has an effect, and it makes you feel good when you do it. They don't know that. So instead they sit in front of their computers feeling really depressed. Mm-hmm. That is what young people are like right now.
Well, there's an incredibly active youth population as well.
It's a much smaller percentage of young people than it used to be.
Is it?
I'm certain of it.
Statistical.
I mean, you know, I'm not a social scientist. I'm telling you what I perceive talking to young people as a professor. Yeah. And that, you know, youth have been at the head of most movements in this country for social change and anti-war activism, and they're not at the head of this movement.
I mean, you know, I think also the way that your students relate to you as a professor is different than your experience of being a youth AIDS activist, or a college age AIDS activist, and that I know that there is a very vibrant youth anti-war movement, anti-globalization movement. Again, this is, you know, sort of a question of how big does it need to be to feel real? And what made the 1960s anti-war movement seem more real when we have actually accomplished significantly more in the anti-Iraq war?
Okay, why did it feel more real?
Why did it feel more real? Because it was probably on television.
Okay, so you and I talked about this
right.
circularly.
Right.
I mean, a lot of what this
right.
my video is about, but your work is about,
right.
is about the feeling.
Right. Right.
Like, what makes the feeling?
Right.
Because you need the feeling that it's effective to continue to do it.
Right.
I think.
Yes, and I think one of the problems is that those who are involved are, do get segmented off, and they get the feeling, but then they get segmented off. They can't share the feeling. Also, one of the things about being exposed to global media is that, in the United States, we've never had 1 million people march against, the WTO, but it happens in India all the time. And so I know a lot of activists or young people, or people in general, see, the news from London and see the news from anywhere, it's bad except for here, and see,
see that it's happening.
hundreds of thousands of people in the street every other week in Rome, and hundreds of thousands of people in the street every other week in London, and know that isn't happening here. And I wonder, did it ever happen here? And that organizing is very different in the United States, and that people feel like they can't do anything. Where that is also clearly the intent of the media, is to make us feel that we are ineffectual here in the United States. When of course this is the most important place to be an activist.